Everyone wants me to forgive my mom for what they said about my dead daughter. The voicemail was still playing when I threw my phone across the room. And don't think this changes anything between us, Daniel. That little girl paid the price for your stubborn pride, and deep down you know I'm right. A real mother would have been in that car instead of letting an 8-year-old walk to her friend's house alone. The phone hit the wall with a satisfying crack, finally cutting off my mother's voice. But the damage was done. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks after I buried my daughter Emma, and Margaret Chin Morrison had decided this was the perfect time to leave me a 7-minute voicemail explaining why Emma's death was actually my fault. I sat there in the dark living room, staring at the broken phone on the hardwood floor. Emma's art supplies were still scattered across the coffee table where she'd left them that Thursday morning before school. A half-finished drawing of our dog, Buster, with his tongue hanging out in that goofy way that always made her giggle. The accident happened on a Friday. March 15th, 3:42 p.m. according to the police report. Emma was walking the 4 blocks from school to her best friend Sophia's house, a route she'd taken dozens of times before. Mrs. Patterson from down the street said the pickup truck came out of nowhere, ran the red light at Maple and 3rd. The driver was texting. I hadn't spoken to my mother in over 2 years before she showed up at the funeral. Margaret had made her position crystal clear when Emma was born. A single father raising a child alone was an abomination and proof of my selfish nature. Never mind that Emma's mother, Jessica, had walked out when Em was 6 months old, leaving behind nothing but a note saying she wasn't cut out for this. Never mind that I'd spent 8 years being both mom and dad, attending every school play, every soccer game, every 3 a.m. fever scare. But there Margaret was at St. Michael's Cemetery, dressed in her expensive black coat, holding court with my aunts and uncles like she hadn't spent nearly a decade pretending her granddaughter didn't exist. I'd been standing by the casket, still numb from the sedatives Dr. Reeves had prescribed, when I heard her voice carrying across the gathering. Maybe this is God's way of punishing him for his life choices, she was telling Aunt Carol and Uncle Mike. If that poor child had a proper mother figure, someone responsible, she might still be alive today. Daniel never did learn to put anyone's needs before his own. Uncle Mike had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Aunt Carol was nodding along like Margaret was delivering wisdom instead of twisting a knife in my chest while my 8-year-old daughter lay in a casket 6 feet away. I'd managed to keep it together that day. Barely. I had Jessica's parents to console. They'd flown in from Oregon and were devastated. I had Emma's teacher, Miss Rodriguez, crying harder than I was. I had a dozen of Emma's friends from her 3rd grade class, confused and heartbroken, asking me why their friend couldn't come back to school. But now, 3 weeks later, Margaret had apparently decided her funeral performance wasn't quite cruel enough. Hence the voicemail. And the text messages that had been coming every few days since then. All variations on the same theme. I was a failure as a father. Emma's death was the inevitable result of my unnatural family structure, and I should be grateful for the lesson God was teaching me. My sister Claire had been calling too, but for different reasons. Danny, you have to let this go, Claire had said during her latest call that morning. I know what Mom said was horrible, but she's 73 years old. She's set in her ways, and this grudge is eating you alive. My sister meant well. She always did. But Claire lived 3 states away in her perfect suburban bubble with her husband Brad and their twin boys, far enough from Margaret's orbit to maintain the illusion that our mother was just difficult instead of genuinely toxic. She called Emma's death God's punishment, Claire. At the funeral. While I was burying my 8-year-old daughter. I know. And that was awful. But holding on to this anger isn't bringing Emma back, and it's not helping you heal. The family is worried about you. The family. That was always Claire's trump card. The great Chin Morrison family unity that had to be preserved at all costs, even if it meant sweeping decades of Margaret's cruelty under the rug. What Claire didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been documenting everything. Every voicemail, every text message, every casual cruelty Margaret had dispensed over the years. I'd started doing it back when Emma was 3 and Margaret sent a Christmas card addressed only to me, with a note inside saying she couldn't in good conscience acknowledge an illegitimate grandchild. I'd photographed the card, saved the envelope. Something told me I'd need evidence someday. I was right. The folder on my laptop was labeled Margaret, Evidence, and it contained 8 years of documentation. Screenshots of text messages calling me pathetic for joining the PDA, photos of birthday cards she'd sent me with pointed messages about how real men don't play house with children. Voicemails from when Emma started kindergarten, where Margaret explained in excruciating detail why a bastard child would never amount to anything without proper family structure. And now, the crown jewel, 7 minutes of my grieving mother explaining why my daughter's death was actually a blessing in disguise. I'd been planning to take it all to my grave, to be the bigger person like everyone expected. But then Claire called with news that changed everything. Mom's really excited about the wedding, she'd said, trying to sound casual. She asked if she could say a few words during the reception dinner. You know, about family and forgiveness and new beginnings. I think it might be really healing for everyone. Claire's wedding was in 6 weeks. She'd been engaged to Brad for 3 years but kept postponing because of various family dramas. Margaret had initially refused to attend because Brad wasn't Catholic. Then she'd threatened to boycott because they were having the ceremony at a vineyard instead of a church. Now, apparently, she'd decided the wedding was the perfect venue for her redemption tour. She wants to give a speech. I'd asked, my voice carefully neutral. Just a short one. She's been talking about how Emma's death really put things in perspective for her, about the importance of family bonds. I think she wants to extend an olive branch, Danny. This could be good for both of you. The audacity was breathtaking. Margaret planned to stand up at my sister's wedding and paint herself as the wise matriarch who'd learned valuable lessons from my daughter's death. She'd probably get teary-eyed talking about the preciousness of life and the importance of forgiveness. The family would eat it up. But I had a different kind of speech in mind. I walked over to my broken phone and carefully picked up the pieces. The screen was shattered, but maybe the voicemails were still intact. I had backups anyway. 6 weeks to prepare. 6 weeks to decide if I was really going through with this. I thought about Emma's last drawing on the coffee table. 6 weeks suddenly didn't feel like nearly enough time. The backup phone I bought the next day buzzed constantly for a week. Margaret, it seemed, had interpreted my silence as encouragement. Daniel, I've been praying for guidance about our situation, read Tuesday's text. God has shown me that Emma's passing was meant to bring our family closer together. We should meet for coffee to discuss healing. Wednesday, your stubborn silence is exactly the kind of selfishness that led to this tragedy in the first place. That poor child deserved better. Thursday, Claire told me you haven't been eating properly. Even in your grief, you need to start acting like a responsible adult. I screenshotted each message methodically, adding them to the folder that now contained 847 individual pieces of evidence spanning nearly 9 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret's renewed contact was only strengthening my case. But it was Friday's message that made me realize I wasn't the only one she was targeting. Your Aunt Carol agrees with me that Emma would want you to forgive and move forward. We've been discussing how to best support you during this difficult time. I called Carol immediately. Oh, Danny, she said when she picked up, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. Margaret and I have been so worried about you. She feels terrible about what happened at the funeral. She was just overwhelmed with grief for Emma. Aunt Carol, what exactly has my mother told you? There was a pause. Well, she explained how she's been trying to reach out, to rebuild your relationship, but you've been difficult. We understand you're hurting, sweetheart, but pushing family away isn't healthy. My stomach dropped. Has she shown you any of the messages she's been sending me? She mentioned she's been trying to encourage you to seek counseling, to help you process Emma's death in a more constructive way. Honey, we're all just concerned that you're isolating yourself when you need family support most. Margaret wasn't just tormenting me, she was systematically turning my extended family into unwitting allies. The messages I was receiving painted her as the concerned mother trying to help her troubled son. The messages she was describing to everyone else told a completely different story. Carol, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. What did my mother actually say to you at the funeral? Word for word. Another pause, longer this time. Danny, I don't think rehashing that day is going to help anyone. Please. I need to know. She sighed heavily. She said that maybe if Emma had more stability, more structure in her home life, things might have been different. But she was upset, we all were. Grief makes people say things they don't mean. Did she say it was God's punishment? Did she call Emma's death a lesson I needed to learn? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Danny. Carol's voice was much smaller now. She was very upset. We all were. That was confirmation enough. I spent the next 3 hours calling other relatives who'd been at the funeral. The pattern was consistent. Everyone remembered Margaret saying something cruel, but they'd all rationalized it as grief-induced temporary insanity. Meanwhile, she'd been working behind the scenes for 3 weeks, painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable anger. By Saturday evening, I had a clearer picture of what I was up against. Margaret wasn't content to simply escape consequences for her funeral performance. She was actively rewriting history, positioning herself as the grieving grandmother trying to heal her broken family while her unstable son refused all help. Claire's wedding was now 5 weeks away. Margaret's redemption speech would be the perfect capstone to her campaign, the wise matriarch who guided her troubled son through tragedy back into the family fold. Unless I stopped her first. I opened my laptop and started typing. If Margaret wanted to give a speech about family truth and healing, then that's exactly what she'd get. Just not the version she was expecting. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Emma's school counselor. Mrs. Davidson called me on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after I'd started documenting Margaret's systematic character assassination campaign. I almost didn't answer. I'd been screening calls since half the family seemed to think I needed intervention-style conversations about letting go of anger. Mr. Morrison. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to check on how you're doing. Emma talked about you so much, and I know how close you two were. Something in her voice made me pay attention. Mrs. Davidson had been at Riverside Elementary for 15 years. She'd seen everything. I'm managing, I said, which was my standard non-answer these days. I also wanted to apologize for something that's been bothering me since the funeral. There was an older woman there, she introduced herself as Emma's grandmother, and she asked me some very pointed questions about Emma's home life. About whether I'd ever had concerns about neglect or inappropriate supervision. My blood turned to ice water. What did you tell her? Nothing, of course. But Mr. Morrison, the way she was asking, it felt like she was fishing for ammunition rather than grieving. She seemed almost disappointed when I told her Emma was one of the happiest, most well-adjusted children I'd ever worked with. She kept pressing, asking if Emma ever seemed hungry or tired, or if her clothes were clean. It made me extremely uncomfortable. I closed my eyes. Even at the funeral, while I was sedated and barely functional, Margaret had been working angles. Trying to build a case that I'd been an unfit father, that Emma's death was somehow preventable if only she'd had proper supervision. Did she talk to anyone else at the school? That's what worried me enough to call. She contacted Emma's teacher, Miss Rodriguez, earlier this week. Asked if she could get copies of Emma's school records for the family. Miss Rodriguez referred her to you, of course, but the whole thing felt wrong. After hanging up, I sat staring at Emma's last report card on the refrigerator. Straight A's, glowing comments from every teacher, a note about how Emma had volunteered to help struggling classmates with reading. The report card of a thriving, loved child. But Margaret was trying to rewrite even that narrative. I called my lawyer, Tom Patterson, no relation to our neighbor Mrs. Patterson, just one of those small world coincidences that felt surreal now. Tom had handled Emma's custody paperwork when Jessica abandoned us, and he'd been at the funeral. Daniel, I'm so sorry to hear about all this. What exactly are you looking for? I need to know my options. If someone is spreading false information about my parenting, trying to access my daughter's school records without permission, building some kind of case against me posthumously, what can I do? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Are you asking about legal remedies, or are you asking if you have grounds to defend yourself publicly? Both, I guess. Legally, it's complicated. She hasn't made any formal accusations, hasn't involved child services, though that could change. But Daniel, you should know that several people have contacted me since the funeral asking about your state of mind and whether you might need assistance managing Emma's affairs or your own. What kind of people? Family members, mostly. Someone's been suggesting you're having a breakdown, that you might not be making rational decisions. I've assured everyone that you're handling everything appropriately, but there's definitely a whisper campaign happening. That evening, I got a call from Claire that confirmed my worst suspicions. Danny, I've been thinking about Mom's speech at the wedding, and I have an idea. What if we made it a joint thing? You and Mom together, talking about healing and family bonds. It might be really powerful. Claire, I'm not giving any speeches. But that's exactly what I mean. Mom thinks you might be more comfortable if it was presented as both of you coming together. She's worried that you're isolating yourself, and she thought this might be a way to show everyone that you're okay, that you're not struggling as much as people think. There it was. Margaret had convinced my sister that I was mentally unstable and needed public reassurance that I was functioning. The joint speech wasn't about reconciliation, it was about Margaret demonstrating her magnanimous support of her troubled son while subtly reinforcing concerns about my mental state. 4 weeks until the wedding. 4 weeks until Margaret's masterpiece performance. But I was beginning to realize that my folder of evidence might not be enough. Margaret wasn't just cruel, she was strategic. And she'd been playing this game a lot longer than I had. It was time to learn the rules. I started making my own calls. The first was to Jessica's mother, Linda, in Portland. We'd maintained a cordial relationship over the years. She sent Emma birthday cards and Christmas presents, called every few months to check in. She'd been devastated at the funeral, had flown out despite her arthritis and fear of flying because Emma was my granddaughter too, no matter what. Daniel, honey, how are you holding up? Linda's voice was warm, concerned. Real concern, not the performative sympathy I'd been getting from my own family. I'm calling because I need to ask you about something. Did anyone from my family contact you after the funeral? There was a pause. Well, yes, actually. Your mother called me last Tuesday. She said she was trying to reach out to everyone who cared about Emma, to make sure we were all supporting each other through this difficult time. My grip tightened on the phone. What did she want to know? She asked a lot of questions about Jessica. About why she left, whether there were any issues in your relationship that might have affected Emma. She seemed very interested in Jessica's mental health history. I felt sick. What did you tell her? Nothing, of course. Jessica's struggles were her own, and they had nothing to do with you or Emma. But Daniel, the way your mother was asking, it felt like she was trying to build some kind of case. Like she was looking for evidence that Emma's environment was unstable. Margaret was covering all her bases. If she couldn't find dirt through the school, she'd try to dig up Jessica's postpartum depression and abandonment to paint a picture of generational dysfunction. Emma as the victim of not just my inadequate parenting, but a legacy of mental illness and family breakdown. My second call was to Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to my mother's side, despite the shared surname, Emma's pediatrician since birth. Dr. Chen had also been at the funeral, had hugged me and told me what an amazing father I was, how healthy and happy Emma had always been. Dr. Chen, I need to ask you something confidential. Has anyone tried to access Emma's medical records recently? Oh, Daniel. Yes, actually. A woman claiming to be Emma's grandmother called yesterday asking about getting copies of Emma's complete medical history. She said it was for family health records and estate purposes. Of course, I couldn't release anything without your written consent, but she was quite persistent. What exactly did she want? Everything. Vaccination records, growth charts, any notes about behavioral concerns or developmental issues. She specifically asked if we'd ever had reasons to suspect neglect or if Emma had ever shown signs of anxiety or depression that might indicate problems at home. I thanked Dr. Chen and hung up, my hands shaking. Margaret wasn't just rewriting the narrative about the funeral, she was conducting a full-scale posthumous investigation into my parenting, trying to build evidence that Emma had been at risk long before the accident. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who'd witnessed the accident. She knocked on my door Friday evening, holding a casserole dish and looking uncomfortable. Daniel, I hope you don't mind me stopping by, but something's been bothering me all week. That woman who was asking questions about Emma, she came by again yesterday. I invited her in, my stomach already dropping. What kind of questions? She wanted to know about that Thursday morning, before Emma went to school. Whether I'd seen Emma walking alone often, whether you were usually home when she left for school, whether Emma ever seemed scared or upset. Mrs. Patterson set down the casserole and looked at me directly. Daniel, she was asking if I'd ever called child services about you. What did you tell her? The truth. That you're the best father I've ever seen, that Emma was the happiest child on this block, that you two were always together working in the garden or playing catch. But Daniel, she didn't want to hear any of that. She kept pushing, asking if I was sure I'd never had concerns, if I might have just been being polite when I said everything seemed fine. 3 weeks until the wedding. Margaret wasn't just planning a speech about forgiveness and healing, she was conducting a comprehensive character assassination designed to reframe Emma's death as the inevitable result of my failures as a father. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how many people genuinely loved Emma and knew the truth about our life together. It was time to start building my own case. I spent that weekend creating a different kind of folder. While Margaret had been busy interrogating anyone connected to Emma's life, I started reaching out to the people she'd missed, or dismissed as unimportant. Emma's soccer coach, Mike Rodriguez. The librarian at Riverside Branch who knew Emma by name because we went every Tuesday for story time. The elderly man, Mr. Hendricks, who lived 2 blocks over and always waved when Emma and I walked Buster past his house. What I found was a network of people who'd watched Emma grow up, who'd seen us together countless times, who had their own stories about the happy 8-year-old girl and her devoted father. Coach Rodriguez was especially helpful when I called him Sunday afternoon. Mr. Morrison, Emma talked about you constantly. Before every practice, she'd tell us what you two had for breakfast, or about some project you were working on together. She was so proud when you came to games, and you never missed one, not in 2 seasons. Mike, I need to ask you something. Did an older woman contact you recently asking questions about Emma? Yeah, actually. She called herself Emma's grandmother, said she was putting together some kind of family memorial. But the questions she asked. He paused. She wanted to know if Emma ever seemed tired at practices, if her equipment was clean, if she ever mentioned being hungry or scared at home. When I told her Emma was always talking about the fun stuff you two did together, she asked if I thought Emma might have been covering for problems at home. I closed my eyes. What did you tell her? The truth. That Emma was one of the happiest kids on the team, and that she obviously adored you. But Mr. Morrison, she didn't seem interested in hearing positive things. She kept pressing, like she wanted me to remember some red flag I'd missed. By Sunday evening, I had contacted 12 people from Emma's world. Margaret had reached 8 of them with the same fishing expedition, always presenting herself as a concerned grandmother, always digging for evidence of neglect or dysfunction, always seeming disappointed when she heard how loved and well cared for Emma had been. But Monday brought a development that changed everything. Claire called, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't sound like she was reading from a script about forgiveness and family healing. Danny, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did Emma ever meet Mom? Like, ever? I sat down slowly. No. Why? Because Mom has been telling people, Brad's family, some of the wedding guests, about her special relationship with her granddaughter. She's been sharing all these detailed stories about times she spent with Emma, things they did together. Brad's mom mentioned how sweet it was that Emma used to call her every Sunday. My mouth went dry. Emma never called her. Margaret made it clear when Em was born that she wanted nothing to do with her. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Danny, she showed Brad's mom a photo album yesterday. Pictures of Emma at various ages, with little handwritten notes about Grandma's special girl and memories of trips they took together. That's impossible. Where would she get pictures of Emma? That's what I'm trying to figure out. She has dozens of them, Danny. Emma at the playground, Emma on her bike, Emma with Buster. Some of them look recent. A chill ran down my spine. Claire, I never sent her photos. I never sent her anything. Then how? Claire stopped mid-sentence. When she spoke again, her voice was much smaller. Oh God, Danny. Brad's mom said some of the pictures looked like they were taken from far away. Like someone was watching. The room started spinning. Margaret hadn't just been conducting a character assassination campaign after Emma's death. She'd been stalking us. For how long? How many times had she been watching Emma play, taking pictures from a distance, building her fantasy grandmother relationship while publicly disowning her granddaughter? Claire, I need you to see those photos. Can you get them from her? I already asked to borrow the album. I told her I wanted to look through it before the wedding, maybe incorporate some of the pictures into the memorial display I was planning. She seemed nervous but agreed. When can you look at it? I'm picking it up tomorrow afternoon. Danny, if what you're telling me is true, if she really cut contact when Emma was born. Claire's voice trailed off. God, what else has she been lying about? After hanging up with Claire, I sat in Emma's room for the first time since the funeral. I'd been avoiding it, couldn't handle seeing her stuffed animals and books exactly where she'd left them. But now I needed to think, and this was where I'd always been able to think clearly, helping Emma with homework at her little desk, reading bedtime stories in the rocking chair I bought when she was a baby. The wedding was 18 days away. Margaret's speech was supposed to be the emotional centerpiece of the reception, her moment of redemption and family healing. But she'd built her entire narrative on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and what was apparently years of secret surveillance. I opened my laptop and created a new document. If Margaret wanted to give a speech about family truth, then I'd give her the platform she deserved. But this time, the whole family would finally hear the real story. Claire called me at 6:23 a.m. the next morning. I could hear her crying before she even spoke. Danny, I have the photo album. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. What did you find? There are 47 pictures of Emma in here. 47, Danny. And they're not normal grandmother photos. Her voice cracked. Some of these were taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. There's one of Emma in our backyard from last summer when she was running through the sprinkler. One of her waiting at the bus stop on what looks like her first day of 3rd grade. My hands started shaking. How far back do they go? The earliest ones look like she's maybe 5 years old. Danny, there's a whole section labeled Emma's soccer season with pictures from games. Mom was there, watching from the parking lot, taking pictures of Emma playing. For years. I thought about all those Saturday mornings at Riverside Park, cheering Emma on from the sidelines. Had Margaret been there too, hidden behind other cars, documenting my daughter's life while publicly claiming she didn't have a granddaughter? There's something else, Claire continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The handwritten notes under each picture, they're not just fake memories. They're detailed. Emma's first goal, so proud of my special girl. Teaching Emma to ride her bike in Meridian Park. Emma's favorite ice cream flavor is strawberry. Danny, how does she know Emma's favorite ice cream flavor? The answer hit me like a physical blow. She's been following us. For years. Not just taking pictures from a distance, she's been close enough to overhear conversations, to watch Emma interact with people. But why? Why document everything if she was telling everyone Emma didn't exist? I closed my eyes, the pieces finally clicking into place. Because she was building evidence. Not for some future reconciliation, she was collecting ammunition. She knew exactly what kind of child Emma was, how happy she was, how close we were. She documented it all so she could twist it later if she needed to. Claire was quiet for a moment. Danny, there's a section at the back labeled, Daniel's Mistakes. It's full of pictures of you two together, but the captions, they're horrible. There's one of you and Emma at the farmer's market, and she wrote, Daniel lets Emma eat sugar for breakfast, irresponsible parenting. Another one from Emma's 7th birthday party in the park, captioned, no proper family structure, Emma surrounded by strangers instead of relatives. My stomach turned. Margaret hadn't just been stalking us, she'd been creating a parallel narrative, reframing every happy memory, every normal parenting decision, as evidence of my inadequacy. She's been planning this for years, hasn't she? Claire said quietly. The funeral, the speech at my wedding, all of it. She's been waiting for the right moment to use all this. Claire, I need you to scan every page of that album. Every photo, every caption. And I need you to do it before she realizes what we've found. I already started. Danny, I'm so sorry. I had no idea how bad this was. When she said she wanted to give a speech about family healing, I thought she was finally trying to make amends. She is making amends, I said, my voice harder than I'd heard it in months. Just not the kind anyone's expecting. After hanging up, I walked to Emma's bedroom window and looked out at the street. How many times had Margaret been out there, hidden behind trees or parked cars, watching us live our lives? How many of Emma's precious moments had been contaminated by her secret presence? The wedding was 17 days away. 17 days to prepare for the most important speech of my life. The photos arrived in my email at 3:17 a.m. on Thursday. Claire had spent 12 hours scanning every page of Margaret's album, and seeing them all together in digital format made the scope of the surveillance even more chilling. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through 47 pictures of my daughter taken without my knowledge. Emma at age 5, building a snowman in our front yard. I remembered that day, but I'd never seen this angle, shot from what looked like the Hendersons' driveway across the street. Emma at 6, chasing Buster through Meridian Park while I sat on a bench reading, except Margaret's photo showed both of us, taken from behind a cluster of oak trees at least 50 yards away. The most recent photo was dated 3 days before the accident. Emma walking out of Riverside Elementary with her backpack, laughing at something her friend Sophia had said. The timestamp read March 12, 2:47 p.m. Margaret had been there, watching my daughter during what turned out to be her final week of life. But it was the folder labeled, supporting documentation, that made my blood run cold. Margaret hadn't just been taking pictures, she'd been taking notes. Detailed, dated observations about our daily routine, my parenting choices, Emma's behavior. The entries read like a case file being built by a private investigator. March 3rd, Daniel allows Emma to walk to school unaccompanied. Route includes crossing busy intersection at Maple/3rd. No safety escort provided. February 18th, Emma playing unsupervised in backyard for 23 minutes while Daniel remains inside house. Child climbed fence to retrieve ball, potential injury risk ignored. January 15th, observed Daniel raising voice at Emma outside grocery store when she dropped juice container. Child appeared startled and apologetic. Possible pattern of intimidation. I stared at that last entry, remembering the day perfectly. Emma had been helping carry groceries when the orange juice slipped from her small hands and exploded across the parking lot. I'd laughed and said, "Oops, Butterfingers," while we cleaned it up together, then let her pick out a candy bar as a consolation prize. But through Margaret's lens, this became evidence of abuse. Every normal moment of our life together had been documented and twisted. Emma's independence became neglect. My trust in her became irresponsibility. Even our laughter and affection became suspicious. The final entry was dated March 16th, the day after the funeral. Daniel shows no genuine remorse for his role in Emma's death. Sedated but defiant during service. Refused comfort from family members attempting reconciliation. Continues to blame external factors rather than accepting responsibility for inadequate supervision that led to tragedy. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire, "Danny, there's more. I found a draft of Mom's wedding speech in the album. You need to see this." The attachment that followed was a 3-page handwritten document titled, "Healing in Truth, A Grandmother's Love." Reading it felt like watching someone desecrate Emma's grave. Margaret's planned speech painted her as the heartbroken grandmother who'd been forced to watch from a distance as her son made increasingly dangerous parenting choices. She described years of gentle attempts at guidance that I had stubbornly rejected. She spoke about Emma as a sweet child trapped in an unstable environment who had reached out to her grandmother for the love and security she wasn't receiving at home. According to the speech, Emma used to secretly call Margaret when she felt scared or lonely. The album photos became evidence of their special bond that I had tried to prevent. Emma's death became the inevitable tragedy that Margaret had spent years trying to prevent through her loving intervention. The speech ended with Margaret offering to help me finally accept the truth about my failures as a father so that Emma's death wouldn't be completely meaningless. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, designed to reframe 3 years of stalking as grandmotherly concern and transform Margaret from the villain of the funeral into the wise matriarch who tried to save us all. 15 days until the wedding. 15 days until Margaret stood up in front of 60 people and delivered the performance she'd been rehearsing for years. But I had something she didn't know about, Emma's diary. I'd found it a week after the funeral, hidden under her mattress where she thought I wouldn't look. Most entries were typical 8-year-old observations about school and friends and Buster's silly habits. But scattered throughout were mentions of the lady who watches me sometimes. Emma had known. I called Emma's best friend's mother that same morning. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Daniel Morrison. I hope I'm not calling too early, but I need to ask Sophia something about Emma. Something important." "Of course, Daniel. Hold on, let me get her." Sophia's small voice came on the line, tentative and sad. She'd been asking her mom when Emma was coming back to school for weeks after the funeral, unable to fully grasp that her best friend was never coming home. "Hi, Mr. Morrison. Is Emma still in heaven?" My throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. She is. Sophia, I need to ask you about something Emma might have told you. Did she ever mention a lady who watched her sometimes? Maybe an older lady she'd seen around school or the playground?" There was a pause, and I could hear Sophia talking to her mother in Spanish. Then Mrs. Rodriguez came back on the line. "Daniel, Sophia says Emma mentioned a picture lady several times over the past year. She said Emma thought someone was taking pictures of her at soccer games and at the park. Did Emma seem scared about it?" Another consultation in rapid Spanish. Sophia says Emma wasn't scared exactly, but she thought it was weird. She said Emma made it into a game sometimes, trying to spot the picture lady and hide from her. After hanging up, I sat staring at Emma's diary entry from October 15th. "The lady was at my soccer game again today. She had a big camera but she was hiding behind the blue car. I scored a goal and I think she took a picture but when I looked again she was gone. Dad didn't see her. Maybe she's shy. Emma had been protecting me from the truth, the same way I'd been trying to protect her from Margaret's existence. She'd known someone was watching her, documenting her life, but she'd processed it through an 8-year-old's logic. Maybe the lady was just shy, maybe she was lonely and liked watching kids play soccer. There were 17 more entries mentioning the picture lady scattered throughout the diary. Emma had been aware of the surveillance for over a year, but she'd never felt threatened enough to tell me directly. She'd just quietly tried to avoid the cameras while making up innocent explanations for behavior that would have terrified any adult. December 3rd, the picture lady was at the library today when Dad and I went for story time. She was sitting in the computer section, but I saw her watching us. I think maybe she doesn't have any books at her house and that's why she comes to watch other people read. February 8th, Sophia's mom asked if the picture lady ever talks to me. I said no, but I think she knows my name because one time I heard her talking on her phone about Emma's routines when she thought I couldn't hear. Maybe she works for Santa and she's checking if I'm being good. The final entry about Margaret was dated March 10th, 5 days before the accident. The picture lady was across from school again today. She looked sad. I waved at her, but she drove away fast. I hope she's okay. Maybe next time I'll ask Dad if we can go say hi so she doesn't have to hide anymore. My daughter had spent her final days worried about her stalker's emotional well-being. She died thinking kindly of the woman who'd spent years building a case against her father, collecting evidence for a revenge that Emma would never live to witness. I closed the diary and opened my laptop. Margaret's wedding speech was supposed to last 10 minutes. Mine was going to be considerably longer. 14 days to finish writing the most important presentation of my life. 14 days to decide if I was really ready to destroy everything Margaret had built, including the parts of our family that might be worth saving. But Emma had waved at her stalker out of kindness, hoping to make a lonely old woman feel less alone. I owed my daughter a different kind of protection now. The call came from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, Emma's third-grade teacher, Miss Rodriguez. Mr. Morrison, I hope you don't mind me calling, but something happened today that I think you should know about. Your mother came to the school again. I gripped the phone tighter. She what? She was in the main office when I arrived this morning, talking to Principal Hayes. She had Emma's photo album with her, the one she showed me at the funeral, and she was asking about getting copies of Emma's academic records and any behavioral incident reports. My stomach dropped. Margaret was escalating. What did Principal Hayes tell her? That all records are confidential and could only be released to you as Emma's father. But Mr. Morrison, she became agitated. She started talking about how Emma's death could have been prevented if the school had properly documented signs of neglect at home. She said she was conducting her own investigation to ensure other children don't suffer the same fate. I closed my eyes. Margaret wasn't just planning a wedding speech anymore, she was building a public case. Did she say anything else? She asked Principal Hayes if he'd be willing to speak at a community awareness event she's organizing about the importance of recognizing when children are at risk. She said she wanted to use Emma's story as a cautionary tale about what happens when warning signs are ignored. The room started spinning. A community awareness event. Margaret wasn't content to destroy my reputation within the family, she was planning to take this public, to turn Emma's death into the centerpiece of some twisted campaign about parental fitness. Miss Rodriguez, in all the time you taught Emma, did you ever have any concerns about her welfare? Mr. Morrison, Emma was one of the most joyful, well-cared-for children I've ever taught. She talked about you constantly, your weekend adventures, the bedtime stories you read together, how proud you were of her artwork. When other children had problems at home, Emma was the one they'd talk to because they knew she felt safe and loved. After hanging up, I immediately called Tom Patterson, my lawyer. Daniel, this is getting serious. If she's approaching school officials and talking about organizing community events, she's moving beyond family drama into something that could affect your professional reputation, your housing, potentially even trigger a posthumous investigation. Can she do that? Can she actually get child services to investigate a dead child's home life? It's unusual, but if she presents enough compelling evidence to the right people, claims there might be a pattern that could affect other children in the community, yes, it's possible. And even if nothing comes of an official investigation, the mere existence of one becomes public record. I thought about my job at Henderson Engineering, where I'd worked for 6 years. About my neighbors, who'd watched me raise Emma and had never seen anything but a devoted father and happy daughter. About Emma's friends' parents, who trusted me enough to arrange playdates and sleepovers. Margaret wasn't just trying to rewrite the past, she was attempting to destroy any future I might have. Tom, what if I go public first? What if I present the real evidence before she can stage her performance? What kind of evidence are we talking about? I explained about the surveillance photos, the fake diary entries in Margaret's album, Emma's real diary entries about the picture lady, the systematic campaign to gather ammunition from Emma's school and doctor. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Daniel, if you can document that she's been stalking you and Emma for years, taking photographs without consent, creating false records, that's not just character assassination. That could be criminal harassment, possibly even stalking charges. But would it be enough to stop her? It would certainly change the conversation. Instead of defending yourself against her accusations, you'd be presenting evidence of her own misconduct. But Daniel, if you go nuclear at your sister's wedding, there's no coming back from that. You need to be absolutely certain this is the path you want to take. 12 days until Claire's wedding. 12 days to decide if I was ready to sacrifice my relationship with my sister to protect Emma's memory and my own future. But Margaret had made that choice for me the moment she decided to turn my daughter's death into her own public relations campaign. I opened my laptop and began drafting a very different kind of speech. The validation I needed came from the most unlikely source, Margaret's own sister, my Aunt Helen, who called me at 7:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Danny, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise you won't repeat this until after Claire's wedding. Helen's voice was shaky, uncertain. I've been wrestling with this for days, but what Margaret's planning, it's not right. I sat down slowly. Aunt Helen had always been Margaret's closest ally, her fellow church committee member and weekly bridge partner. If Helen was calling me, something major had shifted. What do you mean, what she's planning? She asked me to help her prepare her wedding speech. Said she wanted it to be perfect, to really bring the family together after all the tragedy we've been through. Helen paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily. Danny, she practiced it for me yesterday afternoon. The whole thing. My hands started trembling. And it wasn't what I expected. She had props, Danny. A photo album, printed emails, even what she said were pages from Emma's school records. She's planning to present evidence about your parenting, about Emma's living situation. She called it loving intervention and speaking truth in love. I closed my eyes. Helen, did she show you the photos? That's what made me realize I had to call you. Some of those pictures. Danny, they were taken from across streets, from parking lots, through windows. I asked her when she'd gotten so close to Emma to take them, and she said she'd been monitoring the situation for Emma's own safety. How long has she been telling you she was monitoring us? Helen was quiet for several moments. She mentioned it a few times over the years. Said she was concerned about Emma growing up without proper female influence, that she'd drive by occasionally to check on things. But Danny, I thought she meant she'd seen you two at the store or the park occasionally. I didn't realize she was following you. My lawyer's words echoed in my head: systematic surveillance, criminal harassment, stalking charges. Helen, in her practice speech, what exactly did she say about Emma's death? That's the part that made me sick to my stomach. She said Emma's accident was preventable and that she had documentation going back years of unsafe situations you'd put Emma in. She had a whole timeline, Danny. Pictures of Emma walking to school, playing in your backyard, riding her bike. She's planning to argue that Emma died because you were an irresponsible parent who ignored warning signs and rejected family support. I felt like I was going to throw up. Did she mention organizing community events? Talking to people about warning signs? Oh God, yes. She said the wedding speech was just the first step. She's planning to contact a local newspaper, maybe speak at PTA meetings about recognizing neglectful parenting situations. She wants to use Emma's story to educate other families about the importance of extended family involvement in child rearing. Margaret wasn't just destroying me, she was planning to turn Emma into the poster child for her twisted crusade about proper family values and parental supervision. Helen, why are you telling me this? My aunt was crying now. Because I remembered something from the funeral that's been bothering me ever since. When Margaret was talking to Carol and Mike about God's punishment and proper mothers, I saw your face, Danny. You looked like someone had stabbed you. And Emma. Her voice broke. Emma was lying right there in her casket while Margaret was saying those horrible things. She collected herself and continued. I've watched you raise that little girl for 8 years. I saw how much you loved each other. What Margaret's planning to do at Claire's wedding isn't truth or healing, it's revenge. And it's going to destroy Claire's special day while she uses Emma's memory as ammunition. After Helen hung up, I sat staring at Emma's school picture on the refrigerator. Her gap-toothed smile, her eyes bright with mischief and joy. Margaret was planning to stand up in 11 days and tell 60 wedding guests that this beautiful, happy child had died because her father was unfit, irresponsible, neglectful. But now I had something Margaret didn't expect, a witness to her rehearsal, someone from her own inner circle who'd seen behind the curtain. I picked up my phone and dialed Claire's number. It was time to tell my sister exactly what kind of speech our mother was planning to give at her wedding. And it was time to prepare my own presentation. Claire didn't answer my call, which wasn't unusual, she'd been drowning in last-minute wedding preparations. But when she called me back at 11:47 p.m. that same night, her voice told me everything I needed to know. Danny, I confronted Mom about the speech. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. What did you tell her? I asked to hear her practice it, said I wanted to make sure it fit with the tone of the reception. She seemed nervous but agreed. Claire's voice was tight, controlled. Danny, what she's planning, it's not a speech. It's a prosecution. My stomach clenched. Did she show you everything? The photos, the timeline. She has a PowerPoint presentation, Danny. A fucking PowerPoint about Emma's death. She's planning to use the reception's AV system to display photos while she talks about missed warning signs and preventable tragedies. I closed my eyes. Margaret had turned my daughter's memorial into a multimedia indictment of my parenting. Claire, I tried to warn you. I know. God, I know. I thought you were exaggerating because you were grieving, but Danny, she has pictures of Emma from inside our house. From our backyard. Photos taken through windows. Claire's voice cracked. How is that possible? The surveillance had been even more extensive than I'd realized. She's been stalking us for years, Claire. I have Emma's diary entries about the picture lady who watched her at school and soccer games. I canceled her speech. I nearly dropped the phone. You what? I told her the wedding schedule was too packed, that we decided to skip the family remarks portion of the reception. She became unhinged, Danny. Started screaming about how I was enabling your destructive behavior and preventing the family from healing. She said I was just as irresponsible as you were. A chill ran down my spine. What did she say exactly? That I was complicit in covering up the truth about Emma's death. That by not letting her speak, I was ensuring that other children would die because their families wouldn't recognize the warning signs. Claire was crying now. She said I'd have blood on my hands just like you do. Margaret was spiraling, her carefully constructed narrative falling apart as people began questioning her version of events. But a cornered predator was more dangerous than a confident one. Claire, where is she staying while she's in town? The Hampton Inn on Riverside Drive. Room 237. But Danny, she's not just planning to drop this because I canceled her speech. She said if the family won't listen to truth at the wedding, she'll find other ways to make sure Emma's story is heard. My blood turned to ice. What other ways? She mentioned the local news station, said Channel 7 would be very interested in a grandmother's fight to expose the circumstances that led to her grandchild's preventable death. She's planning to frame it as a public safety story, warning signs parents miss that can kill. I thought about Emma's teacher, her pediatrician, her soccer coach, all the people Margaret had already contacted, fishing for ammunition. With the right editing and her fabricated evidence, she could create a compelling narrative for viewers who didn't know the truth. Danny, there's something else. She asked me for your work address, said she wanted to make sure your employer knew about your pattern of poor judgment before you made any decisions that could affect other people's children. Henderson Engineering had several contracts with the school district. Even unfounded accusations about child safety could destroy my career, my professional reputation, everything I built to support Emma and myself. 10 days until the wedding. Margaret's speech might be cancelled, but her campaign was just getting started. But I had 10 days to launch my own offensive. Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me completely. Are you willing to help me stop her? Claire's answer came without hesitation. Whatever you need, Danny. This has to stop. I spent the next 2 hours walking Claire through everything I discovered. The surveillance photos, Emma's diary entries about the picture lady, the systematic contact with everyone in Emma's life, Margaret's fake album with fabricated memories. Claire listened in horrified silence, occasionally asking for clarification but never once questioning the evidence. Danny, I need to tell you something else, she said finally. When I cancelled Mom's speech tonight, she didn't just threaten to go to the media. She said she'd already contacted someone at Channel 7, a producer named Janet Kowalski who specializes in child safety stories. They're supposed to meet Thursday afternoon. My heart sank. 3 days from now. Mom said if the family won't face the truth about Emma's death, then the community deserves to know what warning signs to watch for. She's positioning herself as the brave grandmother who tried to save her granddaughter but was blocked by a stubborn, negligent father. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the street where Margaret had spent years hidden behind trees and parked cars, documenting my daughter's life. Claire, I need you to do something that might feel like betraying our mother. After what I learned tonight. Try me. I need you to record her. Get her talking about the surveillance, about her investigation, about her plans for the media campaign. If she trusts you, if she thinks you're having second thoughts about canceling her speech. Claire was quiet for a moment. You want me to get her to confess to stalking you and Emma? I want her to explain, in her own words, how she spent 3 years taking unauthorized photos of my daughter, building fake documentation, and planning to use Emma's death as a weapon against me. Because Claire, once that news story airs, it doesn't matter if I have evidence. The damage will be permanent. What are you going to do with the recording? I looked at Emma's artwork still scattered across the coffee table. Her drawing of Buster with his tongue hanging out, the one she'd never finished because she died 2 days later. I'm going to make sure everyone hears the truth about who Margaret really is before she can destroy what's left of Emma's memory. Claire sighed heavily. This is really going to end our family, isn't it? Margaret ended our family the moment she stood over Emma's casket and called her death God's punishment. Everything since then has just been the aftermath. We agreed that Claire would call Margaret the next morning, Wednesday, and arrange to meet for coffee. She'd apologize for canceling the speech, say she'd been overwhelmed by wedding stress and wanted to find a compromise. Maybe Margaret could speak at the rehearsal dinner instead, to a smaller, more intimate group of family members who would truly appreciate her message. Margaret would eat it up. The idea of having a more exclusive audience for her presentation would appeal to her sense of drama and importance. Get her talking about Emma, I told Claire. Ask about the photos in the album, the special memories she shared with her granddaughter. Let her elaborate on the relationship she's been claiming to have had. What if she realizes I'm recording? She won't. She's so convinced she's the victim in this story that she'll want to share every detail of her heroic efforts to save Emma from my neglect. Just keep asking questions and let her talk. After hanging up with Claire, I opened my laptop and began outlining a very different kind of presentation. If Margaret was planning to meet with Channel 7 on Thursday, I needed to be ready with my own media strategy by Friday. But first, I had to make one more call. To someone who'd known Margaret longer than anyone else alive, my father's brother, Uncle Robert, who'd cut contact with our family 8 years ago after what he called Margaret's unconscionable treatment of Emma. It was time to find out what other secrets Margaret had been keeping. Uncle Robert answered on the second ring, his voice cautious when he heard mine. Danny. Jesus, I was wondering when you'd finally call. I heard about Emma from Helen. I'm so goddamn sorry, son. Robert had been cut from the same cloth as my father, blunt, honest, with zero tolerance for Margaret's manipulations. He'd walked away from family gatherings years ago after Margaret made a scene about Emma being a bastard child at Christmas dinner 2016. Robert, I need to ask you about something. About why you really stopped coming around. There was a long pause. You sure you want to open that can of worms right now? You've got enough grief to deal with. She's planning to go public with lies about Emma's death. About my parenting. I need to know everything. Robert sighed heavily. All right. But Danny, what I'm about to tell you, it's going to hurt. Your father made me promise to keep it quiet, but he's been gone 4 years now, and if Margaret's targeting that little girl's memory. My hands tightened on the phone. What are you talking about? The day your father died, Margaret was already at the hospital making arrangements before the rest of us even knew he was gone. She had his will changed 3 days before he passed, Danny. Cut you out entirely. The room started spinning. What do you mean, cut out? Your dad left everything to you originally, the house on Elm Street, his life insurance, his retirement accounts. He was so proud when Emma was born, kept talking about how he wanted to make sure his granddaughter would have college money. Robert's voice turned bitter. But Margaret convinced him you were an unfit father. Said Emma would be better served if the inheritance went to responsible family members who could intervene if necessary. I felt sick. How much are we talking about? $230,000, total. The house was worth $160 at the time, plus $47,000 in life insurance and about $23 in his 401k. Robert paused. All of it went to Margaret, with the stipulation that she could use it for the benefit of Daniel's child if and when Daniel demonstrates proper parental fitness. My father's house, the house where Emma and I had spent countless weekends working in his garden, where she'd learned to ride her bike in the backyard, where Dad had read her bedtime stories in the same rocking chair he'd used for me, Margaret had inherited all of it by convincing a dying man that his son was unfit. Robert, did Dad really believe I was a bad father? Hell no. But Margaret, she worked on him for months while he was sick. Brought him newspaper articles about single fathers who'd lost custody, stories about children who'd been hurt because there wasn't a mother in the home. She convinced him that leaving you money would be enabling your dangerous lifestyle choices. I thought about the college fund I'd been building for Emma, $50 at a time for my engineering salary. About the life insurance policy I'd taken out to protect her future. About how I'd struggled sometimes to afford her soccer fees and art supplies while Margaret sat on $250,000 that my father had originally intended for his granddaughter. Did she ever use any of it for Emma? She was supposed to help if I proved my fitness, right? Robert's laugh was bitter. Danny, she used that money to buy a condo in Scottsdale and take cruises with her church friends. As far as Margaret was concerned, you could never prove fitness because the very act of being a single father made you unfit by definition. The manipulation was even deeper than I'd realized. Margaret hadn't just stolen my inheritance, she'd stolen Emma's future while simultaneously building a case that I was too irresponsible to provide for my daughter properly. Robert, would you testify to this? If I needed documentation of what she did. Son, I've been waiting 8 years for someone to ask me that question. Thursday afternoon, I was sitting in the Channel 7 parking lot when Margaret walked out of the building with Janet Kowalski, the producer Claire had warned me about. They shook hands warmly, and Margaret was smiling that satisfied smile I remembered from childhood, the one she wore when she'd successfully manipulated a situation to her advantage. But what Margaret didn't know was that I'd already spent 2 hours that morning in the same conference room, playing Janet the recording Claire had made at their coffee meeting yesterday. I'd been documenting Daniel's inadequate parenting for years, Margaret's voice had said through my phone speaker, clear as day. I had to be creative, of course, he would have tried to stop me if he'd known I was monitoring Emma's welfare. But a grandmother has responsibilities, even when she's forced to work from the shadows. Janet's expression had shifted dramatically as she listened to Margaret describe her surveillance methods, her fake photo album, her systematic campaign to gather evidence against me from Emma's school and doctor. She actually took pictures through your windows? Janet had asked, her investigative instincts clearly triggered. For 3 years. My daughter knew about it, she wrote about the picture lady in her diary. An 8-year-old child knew she was being stalked, but she was too kind to tell me because she thought the lady looked lonely. I brought everything. Emma's real diary with entries about trying to hide from the picture lady. Screenshots of Margaret's surveillance photos with timestamps and GPS data that Robert had helped me extract. The fake album with its fabricated captions about grandmother-granddaughter relationships that never existed. Documentation of the inheritance Margaret had stolen by convincing my dying father I was unfit. But the recording was the smoking gun. Margaret, in her own words, admitting to years of stalking, explaining how she built false evidence, describing her plan to use Emma's death as ammunition in her crusade against single fathers. Mrs. Morrison, Janet had said carefully, what your mother-in-law is describing isn't grandmotherly concern. It's criminal harassment. And her claim that she was trying to protect Emma, the evidence you've shown me suggests Emma was thriving until the day she died. Now, watching Margaret walk to her car outside Channel 7, I knew her meeting with Janet had gone very differently than she'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet, interview cancelled. Considering story about elderly woman who stalked grieving father after grandchild's accidental death. We'll call tomorrow to discuss. Margaret's campaign was over. Friday morning, I drove to Riverside Cemetery with fresh sunflowers, Emma's favorite, and sat by her headstone for the first time since the funeral. The simple inscription read, Emma Grace Morrison, beloved daughter, she made everything brighter. I kept my promise, Em, I said aloud, arranging the flowers. I protected you. My phone rang. Claire. Danny, Mom's leaving town today. She called this morning, said the family had chosen our side, and she wouldn't waste any more time trying to help people who refused to see the truth. Did she say anything about Channel 7? Just that the media was too biased to tell Emma's real story. But Danny, she's done. Helen talked to her yesterday, Mom's not coming to the wedding, not contacting any more reporters, not pursuing her community awareness campaign. I think she finally realized that people were starting to see through her act. Sunday morning, Claire's wedding was beautiful. Simple, elegant, full of laughter and joy instead of manipulation and revenge speeches. During the reception, I gave my own brief remarks, not about Margaret or family drama, but about Emma. How she would have loved seeing Aunt Claire in her wedding dress. How she'd been excited to be the flower girl before the accident. How she'd made everyone around her a little bit happier just by existing. Later that evening, as I helped stack chairs and clean up, Uncle Robert pulled me aside. Danny, I've been talking to my lawyer about your father's will. Turns out there's a 7-year statute of limitations on inheritance fraud in this state, and it's been exactly 6 years and 4 months since your dad died. He handed me a business card. If you want to fight for what Emma should have inherited, you've got about 8 months to file a claim. I looked at the card, thinking about the college fund that would never be used, the life insurance money that could have secured Emma's future. $230,000 that Margaret had stolen through lies and manipulation. Robert, would Emma want me to spend the next year fighting Margaret in court? My uncle smiled sadly. No, son. But Emma would want you to have the resources to heal, to rebuild, to maybe help other kids whose families are falling apart. I tucked the card into my wallet. On the drive home, I made one final stop at the intersection of Maple and 3rd. The memorial garden the city had planted there was thriving, pink roses and yellow daisies, Emma's favorite colors. A small plaque read, in memory of Emma Morrison and all children taken too soon. Margaret had tried to turn Emma's death into a weapon. Instead, the community had turned it into something beautiful. Justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it's dramatic courtroom victories or public humiliation. But sometimes it's simpler, it's the truth being heard, the lies being exposed, and the memory of a beautiful child being protected from those who would twist it for their own purposes. Emma was finally safe from Margaret's cruelty. And for the first time since the funeral, I was ready to start figuring out how to live without her.